I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Chaffee. Caitlin joined the Narragansett Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve in Portsmouth, Rhode Island in 2020 as the reserve manager. Prior to that, she served for 14 years as a coastal policy analyst with the Rhode Island Coastal Resource Management Council, where she focused on habitat restoration and coastal resilience. So take it away, Caitlin.
Thank you, Kathy, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of this workshop. I've really enjoyed all of the presentations today and yesterday. I'm going to attempt to share a video with you all, and if it crashes and burns, I apologize in advance, but I'm going to do that now. So do I need to take control, Kathy?
Yes. Are you able to take control and just put yours up?
Are you seeing a video screen from me?
Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, let's see. Actually, I'm going to stop for 1 minute here. Let's I need to turn on audio. Okay. So I'm just going to play this for a few minutes. This is a video that we created. We're going to move into kind of the project implementation topic. So this was a video we created after doing a couple of sediment placement projects on the south shore of Rhode Island. Just going to play a little bit of this.
Because humans already have intervened and changed these habitats, we should be the ones intervening to try to solve that problem.
We started looking at different adaptation efforts to address these degraded salt marshes. One technique is simply digging shallow creeks, trying to give this water a chance to get off the marsh. Another technique we started considering about 5 years ago is to bring sediment in from surrounding areas and literally build the elevation of the marsh.
What we do today is what our grandchildren are going to benefit from. They're going to enjoy what we have here today, and hopefully we won't lose that.
People want to do something, and it empowers the community to take part and contribute to these restoration efforts.
Okay. That was just a brief introduction. I had to stop it before I came on screen because I don't want anybody to see that. Can you all see my presentation now? And I'm going to reverse my.
Yes.
And you're seeing my full screen here?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you again for inviting me here today. Couple of reasons to show that video. One was to introduce you to the co-author of this presentation, who's actually not here today, but was extremely integral to both the projects I'm going to talk about, and that's Wenley Ferguson. She's the director of habitat restoration at Save the Bay in Narragansett Bay. So Save the Bay was the primary partner along with the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council, which is where I was when these projects went forward. So we're kind of, a lot of these slides are Wenley, so wanted to give you a brief introduction to her, and also to highlight the gentleman in the middle of the video was Rob Lyons. He was an owner of a marina on Ninigret Pond where we did one of our projects, and that was a very unscripted moment in that video, and it just that was after 2 of the projects had been implemented, and just trying to focus on the community aspect of these topics. I really feel like, you know, the biological indicators are very important to look at when you're talking about measuring success. But for me, when Mr. Lyons said that about preserving what we have for the next generation, and he was not just talking about boating access, he was talking about the marshes, that was a real measure of success for me. So, you know, I try to keep that in mind. You know, we all have different objectives, but if we can get people on board and create a feeling of stewardship, we're doing something right. So thought I would kind of set the tone. So today I'm going to talk about 2 case studies. Hopefully, I'm going to talk about Ninigret Pond specifically and hopefully get to number 2. I've got quite a few slides, but very similar projects, both sediment placement projects on the south shore of Rhode Island. I've done a lot of presentations on these projects. We've just submitted a paper based on the Ninigret Pond project, based on the monitoring data that came out of that project. I'm going to talk less today about the nuts and bolts and more about, again, the kind of community outreach, collaborative aspect of these projects. But I'm certainly happy to address any specific questions that any folks have about the project details. So if I skim over something, please feel free to put that in the chat or ask me. So these two projects, South Shore of Rhode Island along that coastal lagoon system, that's actually been mentioned in a couple of presentations during this workshop. Ninigret was the project to the east. We'll start there. Again, these are the two project sites here. Ninigret, this is just kind of the nuts and bolts. So this project was done in 2017. It was a hydraulic dredging and direct sediment discharge project. We got funding for this project through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Hurricane Sandy Resilience Grant Program. So this was a situation where we were kind of looking for an opportunity to test this technique for marsh adaptation or restoration in Rhode Island. Not a lot of these projects had been done in the Northeast. And when the Hurricane Sandy funds became available, we saw that as an opportunity. I will kind of breeze through the rest of the details here, but certainly we can go back to that slide if needed. Just a note on, this was a kind of the motivation behind this project was science-based. A shout out to the reserve and long-term monitoring of marshes. Through that work, we know we could see that high marsh habitats throughout Rhode Island marshes were declining. And this is just one of the many figures produced by Dr. Kenny Raposa at the reserve, showing that decline in Spartina patens or high marsh habitat. And so that was a primary concern of our team, and the implications that has for species dependent on those habitats, such as salt marsh sparrow. So I think we went into the project kind of having that goal of increasing the area of high marsh in this marsh complex. And again, the site selection, there were some preliminary vulnerability assessments that had been done by Save the Bay throughout the Bay, throughout Rhode Island marshes. And the South Shore marshes were certainly seen as being particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. We had run SLAM maps for the entire state. We've talked a lot about those. And you'll see here, this is the Ninigret system. And I think I can use my pointer here. So this is a man-made breachway, and it's a back barrier marsh system. And so really, and I think you'll remember, I think it was Simona's presentation when she was talking about economic value going forward with sea level rise. And there were two communities in Rhode Island where marshes were projected to decrease over time and that economic value was to go down. And Charlestown was one of those communities. So I think that's probably because the big marsh systems on the salt ponds or coastal lagoons are back barrier systems. There's really no opportunity for them to migrate. You can see here, these are developed residential parcels. So no real room for migration and high potential for loss. So that was just one of the reasons we chose this site. We did a lot of information gathering. We did a lot of elevation surveys, vegetation surveys. We talked to other people who had completed sediment placement projects. I think the closest geographically at the time was Jamaica Bay. Fish and Wildlife Service in Rhode Island had just completed one. And then we talked a lot to dredging experts. Luckily, at the time at the Coastal Resources Management Council, we had a marine infrastructure dredging expert on staff who was a great help. And again, there was mention of tipping points when looking at our project site at Ninigret. This was the condition of a good portion, probably about 1/3 of the project site. So you can see here just denuded areas with kind of newly dead and bare areas that used to be marsh. You can see some historic open water and pond and creek areas in the background here, but this die-off had been recent and we were seeing it spread throughout the site. So we felt that this marsh was in pretty poor condition. It was not supporting wildlife, fish and wildlife. And so there was basically only room for improvement. So the trade-off there we felt was one we could live with. I think Kate Mulvaney mentioned this when she was talking about the project, but the town was a critical partner. And you can see in this aerial photo that, and again, this is the man-made breachway. This is our project site. But the pond itself experiences a great deal of shoaling. So this is basically beach sand that's come in and settled in the pond. And that's a concern because recreational boating is a huge activity on this pond. And the marinas and recreation really are an economic driver, not to mention a good portion of the tax base for the town lives in this coastal pond area. So the town, we really did have to partner with the town. They also held the dredging permit, which was key. So they became part of our project team. They really helped us with the funding proposal development, and we went back and forth in that kind of iterative process that Kate talked about yesterday to develop a design that would meet everybody's goals. And then we kind of cast the net wide for our monitoring team as well. And so we had a really diverse group of organizations involved in the monitoring effort. We recognized that this was pretty much a pilot project for us, and we wanted to gather as much information as we could to talk about success and if we'd be using this technique going forward. With a big project team, of course, comes challenges, lots of cooks in the kitchen. So I think the hardest was really just establishing those project goals and objectives. As you can imagine, you know, the town's primary concern was not salt marsh sparrow habitat. They were really interested in the dredging aspect of the project. And the main conflict we kind of ran up against was that the amount of sediment that they wanted to dredge out of the channel was more than we needed for the marsh restoration. So that created some tension. The funding we had got was for habitat restoration. So it was a matter of kind of balancing those restoration goals with the needs of the town. You know, did they see a point in doing the project if we weren't going to dredge to the extent they wanted? And the solution we came to was that we had kind of two phases where a portion of the sediment dredged went to the marsh restoration, and then there was a beach nourishment phase where the excess sediment was discharged onto the adjacent beach. We were worried that that would blow the budget for the entire project, having that second phase, so that also caused some stress. Luckily, the construction bids came in low and we were able to do it all, but certainly it was fraught. You know, there was some tension there. And it was kind of a back and forth process. And all the while, again, this was mentioned a lot yesterday, we were dealing with uncertainty. So uncertainty in measurements, in, you know, tidal elevations, in the equipment that would be used to implement the design and how accurate that could be. And then we really didn't have a solid idea of what the construction was going to cost because we had so few examples to look to. We worked hard with contractors to try to get an accurate construction estimate, but we were flying blind for a bit of it. So just a lot of uncertainty to deal with. To kind of hedge our bets, we decided on a design that kind of targeted a high marsh elevation, and then within these were separate restoration units. So the red represents like a maximum elevation, and then the edges of each unit would be graded down to drain or to tie into adjacent elevations. So we figured we would create a continuum of elevations and hit that marsh sweet spot at some point along that continuum. We also ran into time of year restrictions. Our dredge window is basically December and January. And so crews were working in the winter on a 24-hour, 6-day-a-week or 7-day-a-week schedule. That was largely to prevent the pipes freezing, material freezing. And so that was a brutal schedule. And it was really hard to have constant construction oversight because the work was happening all the time and very fast. And if there were a few other concerns, I'll just run through here. So just a few pictures from implementation at Ninigret. 2 hydraulic dredges were used. I think that was my chime. Thank you. And so direct discharge onto the marsh. The contractor actually was very creative with water management. So they came up with a system for managing water, which was very effective. The results, we pretty much hit our conceptual design, but certainly not 100%. And there was some fine tuning that had to happen afterwards. This is what the site looked like from the air immediately after. And so we learned quickly water was a concern, but also sand was a concern because it moved quickly once it dewatered. And having an on the ground contractor like Save the Bay, not contractor, but partner, to address that with vegetation. We used buffers, beach grass to control sand movement. lots of a massive planting effort, and reestablishing hydrology. So in constructing creeks that would help to drain surface water and groundwater, and tie into those elevations where we missed the mark. And again, so this was our starting condition. This was immediately after sediment placement, and I believe this was the third growing season. So we're seeing progress. It looks even better now. And I know I'm running out of time, so I will just briefly go through the next project. Again, these are kind of the stats, and it was extremely similar to Ninigrit, but I'm going to focus on, these are the pre-existing conditions. The community support we built in the first project, we were able to, we really needed that support when we fell short on our construction budget for the Quani project. And so that support led to them supporting additional municipal funding for the construction. And they actually, the nonprofits involved did a lot of fundraising. So building those relationships proved to be really essential. And just the lessons learned that we brought forward were really all about elevation controls, using RTK enabled equipment. And then again, that management of water, of sand. Planting, we realized, was not all that necessary, but it is a great way to engage the community. So we engaged, Save the Bay engaged a lot of volunteers, even though most of the recovery we've seen has been natural seeding in. And these are kind of some panoramic views of the recovery at Quani, the Quani project. So that was kind of a whirlwind tour. Just I'll end with some key lessons learned is, creating a strong team, and that might include municipal partners, and it's okay if the objectives are slightly different, and find a way to find some common ground. Set realistic goals and expectations based on uncertainty and limitations of equipment and personnel. Let your contractors suggest the best methods. Sometimes that's the best way to go. And then plan for adaptive management after the initial construction phase. I think that's one of the key lessons learned, is that once the construction crews leave, there's going to need to be some fine tuning for a project like this. And I'm going to blow by my last two slides, but somebody mentioned celebration yesterday. And so, yeah, that's also important. Getting your team together to celebrate small victories, and obviously promoting your successes to your congressional delegation here, Senator Whitehouse and Wenley, at the project site. And that is my last slide.
Awesome talk, Caitlin. Thanks so much.
Thank you.